Hey friends, it's Jasmine. I hope that you all are doing well. Are witches born or are witches made? Do you choose to become a witch or have you always been a witch? This is what I would like to address today. I think that this particular topic it's controversial, and even amongst witches, it's controversial. You know, some witches very much believe that once you are a witch, you have always been a witch. And if you choose to step into the craft in any degree, then you've probably always been a witch. Like part of this whole idea that if you are a witch, you've always been a witch. Other side of this coin is that there are witches who say they were not born a witch and they came to the craft. And I think this makes for some very interesting dialogue. And I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on this matter and kind of your opinions on this. This is something that I am exploring myself. You know, I mean, I have my own thoughts, I have my own opinions. However, we can always change. So my opinions and my thoughts on this matter, I am kind of, I guess, documenting right now, but maybe in a year from now or in 5 years from now, I might have a different opinion, and like, that's okay. It's okay for our opinions to evolve with life experience and things like that. So yeah, I think that, you know, are witches born or are witches made? I think this is such a delicious topic. I mean, it really is. And it's so intellectually like stimulating to think about. And I made a post on Facebook about this actually, to see what some of my social media friends kind of thought, and their thoughts kind of resonated with me and with kind of what I thought. I said some witches very much believe that witches are born. You are born a witch. Like, they believe this very fundamentally, that if you are a witch, you are born one. You do not choose to be one. That the craft cannot be revoked or washed clean of your spirit. That if you are a witch, you are born into certain natural gifts or abilities or inclinations, if you will. That if you are born a witch, you are born with certain clairs, you know, maybe like clairaudient, clairsentient, clairvoyance, claircognizance, etc. You are born with a natural connection to the earth, to the soil, to the moon, to the sun, to our planetary influences. That you are naturally inclined to maybe animals or plants. I know that a lot of witches feel that we are born this way, that it is not necessarily a choice, that this is where our life path or our soul has brought us. There are also witches who disagree, and they themselves identify as witch, but who feel like they chose this path, that there were other paths they could have gone down, but yet they chose the path of the witch. And I think the path of the witch is subjective to what our individual paths are, if that makes sense. There are witches who think that witches choose the craft because anyone can be a witch as long as you're practicing witchcraft. Because witchcraft is a verb, not a noun, and it's something that you do. So if you practice witchcraft, you would then be a witch. So I think that's valid too. I think that this topic, it's hard and it's difficult because I don't think that I personally have a super clear answer on where I stand with this. To some degree, I agree with witches are born. I think that you can definitely be born within a magical tradition or a magical lineage. And that is not necessarily your choice what lineage you are born into. But I know that some of us, or many of us, may have been born into folk practices or traditions that may or may not necessarily be called witchcraft, but we can kind of put them under that umbrella, if you will. I think that for witches, sometimes we are born into this. For my own family, things like astrology or divination, or even candle magic. These were very just like common things in my family, and these were not things that were necessarily called witchcraft at face value. Looking at horoscopes, sun signs, or even casting like natal charts wasn't necessarily looked at as witchcraft. Doing candle magic and putting your intentions on a candle, or like as my mother called them, prayer candles. They were not called witchcraft, but in its own way, in its own right, in my opinion, it is kind of witchcraft.
Right? Like,
you're putting your intention through a form of sympathetic magic. And if that's not witchcraft, like, I don't know what is. Or using oracle cards, angel cards, tarot cards, reading palms, practicing cartomancy. That's very much divination, which in my opinion is fundamentally part of the craft. And, I think that some of the folks in my family, like my mother or my grandmother, like would not consider this to be witchcraft at all. Like, this is just folk practice, like reading palms, like that's a cultural thing, has nothing to do with paganism or anything of the sort. But to me, it does. So for me personally, are witches born or are witches made? And I know I'm rambling here. And if you're still even watching this, like, I appreciate you for just like listening to my rambles. And we talked about this specific topic actually on the season finale of
As the Cauldron Bubbles,
my podcast, which if you haven't listened to, you should check out the playlist here on the YouTube channel. It's cool. It's fun. I kind of run that. So yeah, I love it. But anyway, what do I think? Are witches born or are witches made? I think both. And I think that, I think a witch can be born a witch. But I think that what a witch chooses to do with their birthright is fundamentally up to them. I am 4 of technically eight in my family. Growing up, I have hailed from, or I have come from, a yours, mine, and ours family. I have a wonderful stepfather who's like my dad, and I had some inherited family. All kind of raised with certain values and certain inclinations. And, I think that for myself, I see myself as being born a witch in the sense that I was born into astrology, divination, and spellcraft in the way that I grew up with my mother practicing these things. And while my mother, maybe she would not have identified as witch, she has since crossed the veil. And I think that she would be very proud of where I'm at now and like excited with what I'm doing in my life. And I could see her nowadays in 2021, I could see her identifying with the label as witch. But I think, you know, in the early 90s or 80s or 70s, I think it was a different world. You know, I don't think that people were using the word witch the same way that we were today. And my grandmother is still alive. And a lot of her practices with like dream interpretation and dream therapy and astral travel and psychoanalytics and all of those things. Some of that, you know, she would incorporate Eastern medicine into her practice. She had her own psychiatry, like practice and psychology office. And some people, I think, could consider some of the stuff that she did witchcraft, or, I mean, maybe even shamanism. I don't know if that's really the right word to really define it as. But my Grams, you know, is very much a woman of her time. And I very much hope to have her on my channel at some point if she would oblige. I think that nowadays she would really get a kick out of the word witch. And she knows what I do. And she fully supports what I do here on YouTube and what I do for a living. And I mean, she knows that I identify as witch, and like, she loves it. But if she herself would identify as witch, that's kind of up in the air. I mean, I'm not really sure. I might have to ask her. I've never heard her call herself a witch, but the things that she has done over the years and things that she has said,
it's definitely witchcraft, in my opinion.
In the terms of are witches born as a witch, and I can only speak for myself, but as a witch, I definitely feel like I was born into the craft. And I've always had a natural inclination to the 8th house: sex, death, magic, transformation, the occult. I've always had like a natural inkling or a natural desire to liminal spaces like dusk and dawn, or the equinoxes, Ostara, Mabon. I've always loved the space of the in-between and the liminal space. And that has always really kind of drawn me in, if you will. I've also always loved this, I guess, idea of something else outside of our way of describing. You know what I mean? Like this idea of something other, whether that be nature spirits or the dead and the damned, you know, other worlds, other dimensions, other realms, other planets. Like all of those things have just always really intrigued me. And you can ask any of my close friends or my partner, but I love all of those unsettling, spooky stories. I love feeling this carnal sense of fear, of uncomfort, discomfort, and having that fill me in a way. I've always been very drawn to herbs and natural medicine, and part of that, I think, ties in with my upbringing and culture and being introduced to natural medicine, hence being born a witch. I've always been very drawn to herbalism. I've always been very drawn to polytheism as well. And for those of you who have been to my grandmother's house, and maybe for some of you guys who have not, obviously, because like I'm posting this on YouTube, and I think that the channel now is up to like 1.6K something followers. So that's kind of crazy sometimes for me to think about. It's just like, that's a lot of people. And I know that you guys haven't necessarily been to my Gram's house, but yeah, I grew up around polytheism, with this idea of polytheism, with this idea that there is multiple gods. And I think that's something that it makes it interesting in the coven, because a lot of the witches who are in the coven come from more of an Abrahamic background. And while I do have, some Abrahamic influence in my family, growing up around different variations of gods was very commonplace. I mean, my grandmother has like canopy jars over her mantle and papyrus scripts of Bast and Anubis over her grand piano. Her entire living room is themed after Kemetic gods, and her dining room is themed after Greek gods. There's a Minoan bull, and she has a beautiful chess set hung up on her wall, kind of catty corner to the dining room table, of the Olympians, and it's like a chess set, and it's so cool. But I grew up with this concept that essentially God is love, and God is immortal, and God is eternal, and God is multiple. So these various pagan gods, that I grew up with, and the mythologies that I was taught about growing up, it wasn't necessarily taught in like a dogmatic way. I don't necessarily feel like I grew up as a pagan per se, but I definitely had a very eclectic spiritual upbringing. So yeah, I definitely think that in a lot of ways, I was born a witch. I was born with a natural inclination to witchcraft. I mean, I remember being like 9, 10 years old, making like potions out of mud and using sticks and leaves and, random wildflowers I found outside and stirring my intentions into that concoction. But also, are witches made? I also agree with this, I think that witches are made. Because as someone who has several siblings, I have siblings who were raised the same way that I was, and who don't practice divination or witchcraft at all, but yet we were raised the same. So if witches being born was only it, then why wouldn't my siblings also follow in line with the craft if that was the case? Now, granted, some of us have totally separate blood, right? Like we're step siblings, but siblings nonetheless. So that kind of rules, I feel like, nurture out of the equation. It doesn't always have to do with nurture. But what about nature? My siblings who we do share blood, they also don't fall in line with the craft. I think that you can be born a witch, but what you choose to do with that is up to you. I very much agree with the sentiment that witch is a noun. It describes a person who practices witchcraft. But I also think witch is a verb, just like jumping or singing. Witch is a verb in the sense that it is what we do. So you do witchcraft, not just are witchcraft or are a witch. Are a witch because you practice witchcraft. So I think that witches being made can also kind of correlate to initiations in a way. You might be initiated into a coven or initiated into witchcraft. And I think you can also dedicate yourself as a witch or to the study of witchcraft, or dedicate yourself to a tradition, like in terms of a self-dedication. I think that witches being made kind of entails that you really apply yourself to the craft. So while we all kind of might have varying levels of abilities and skills and natural inclinations, Maybe you're really interested in herbal medicine or crystals or dreams or astral travel or kitchen witchery or, green witchery or love magic or whatever.
I mean, whatever, right?
You still have to commit yourself to practicing and studying. So in that sense, I think that witches are made. And I think that this question is something that I definitely want to sit on more. Because as of right now, if you asked me right now, Jasmine, are witches born or are witches made? I think I would say both. And part of me feels like that's a cop-out because I want to be able to say they're made or they're born. But I definitely feel like they are born and they are made. And that is kind of where I stand as of now. So I'm sorry if that's not maybe the answer that you were wanting or that you were looking for. And I would love, though, to hear, your comments and your opinions about are witches born or made. So please make sure that you comment those down below. Give this video a like or a dislike and subscribe if you enjoyed this. And until next time, guys, blessed be.